The entire first-class cabin falls silent as flight attendant Amber Wilson stands rigid, her face flushed with embarrassment. Across from her, an elderly black couple quietly displays their platinum ownership badges, while the airline CEO rushes down the aisle, his career flashing before his eyes. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to catch more jaw-dropping true stories of karma and justice served. Now, let's rewind to see how this flight attendant's worst day at work began. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Reagan National Airport as Isaiah and Ruby Washington made their way toward the Eclipse Airlines check-in counter. At 78 and 76 years old respectively, they moved with the unhurried confidence that comes from decades of success. Isaiah wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that complemented his salt and pepper hair, while Ruby had chosen an elegant burgundy pantsuit with a simple pearl necklace. Nothing about their appearance screamed wealth or power, just two well-dressed seniors preparing for a flight. Ready for another mystery shopper adventure, Isaiah whispered to his wife, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Always," Ruby replied with a smile that still made his heart skip a beat after 52 years of marriage. "Let's see if our baby is still running the way we intended." Their baby wasn't a person, but Eclipse Airlines, the company they had built from nothing into one of America's most successful regional carriers. Worth billions today, Eclipse had begun with just two small planes and a dream of creating an airline where everyone would be treated with dignity. After years of facing discrimination throughout the aviation industry, the Washingtons had decided to change things from the inside out. Despite their immense wealth and status, Isaiah and Ruby preferred traveling incognito several times a year. No executive entourage, no special treatment, just two regular passengers observing the quality of service firsthand. Today, they were flying from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta, where the company headquarters awaited them for an official visit tomorrow. As they approached the first-class counter, a young flight attendant named Amber Wilson glanced up from her tablet. She was checking in passengers while the regular counter agent was on break. Tall, blonde, and in her late 20s, Amber had been with Eclipse Airlines for just under a year. Her welcoming smile faltered as she saw the elderly black couple approach the first-class line. Without even checking their tickets, she stepped forward with a tight smile. "Excuse me," she said in a tone one might use with confused children. "Economy check-in is in that direction." She pointed to the significantly longer line across the terminal. Ruby raised an eyebrow. "We have first-class tickets, young lady." Amber's expression shifted to one of disbelief. "Are you sure? Let me see those." She held out her hand expectantly, her tone making it clear she thought they were mistaken. Isaiah calmly handed over their tickets and ID. Eclipse Airlines Flight 1876 to Atlanta. First class seats 2A and 2B. Amber examined the tickets, her lips pursed. "These must be upgrades from your frequent flyer miles," she said dismissively, making an assumption with no basis. "We're quite certain they're not," Ruby replied evenly. From the next counter, Timothy Brooks, a seasoned customer service representative in his 50s, glanced over. Recognition flashed in his eyes immediately, but before he could speak, Ruby caught his gaze and subtly shook her head. Timothy interjected gently. "Perhaps you could finish checking in, Mr. and Mrs. Washington. I have another passenger waiting." With visible reluctance, Amber processed their check-in. "Boarding starts in 45 minutes, she said, curtly returning their documents and handing them their boarding passes, without the customary welcome speech she'd given to previous first-class passengers. As they walked away, Isaiah whispered to Ruby, "Think we should tell her?" "Not yet," Ruby replied. "Let's see how this plays out. We've been getting reports about inconsistent service quality. Maybe we're about to find out why." They spent the next hour observing the boarding procedures from the first-class lounge, taking mental notes of staff interactions with various passengers. When boarding began, they deliberately waited until the final call. "This way, we'll see the full boarding process," Isaiah explained to his wife, though she knew their routine well, "and we'll get a better picture of how the crew handles different types of passengers." Ruby nodded in agreement, her experienced eyes missing nothing, as they prepared to board as the very last passengers on Flight 1876 to Atlanta. By the time Isaiah and Ruby approached the gate, the boarding area had mostly cleared out. The gate agent, a young man named Derek, checked their boarding passes with a warm smile and wished them a pleasant flight. As they walked down the jetway, Ruby made a mental note, one positive interaction so far. Stepping onto the aircraft, they were greeted by the same flight attendant they'd encountered at check-in. Amber Wilson stood at the entrance, welcoming passengers with practiced efficiency. Isaiah and Ruby observed how she interacted with the white businessman ahead of them. Warm smile, eye contact, friendly. "Welcome aboard, sir. Right this way to your seat." Her expression changed dramatically when she saw the Washingtons. The smile vanished, replaced by a tight professional mask. "Boarding passes," she said, flatly extending her hand, without the courtesy title she'd used with other passengers. Isaiah handed them over calmly, watching her reaction. Amber studied the passes longer than necessary. "These say first class," she said, skepticism evident in her tone. "That's correct," Ruby replied pleasantly. "Are you sure you didn't get upgraded at the gate? Sometimes the system does that automatically." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "Young lady, we purchased first-class tickets, as we always do when flying Eclipse Airlines." Amber's lips pressed into a thin line. "Let me just verify these one more time." She pulled out her tablet and began checking something. By now, other passengers in first class were watching the interaction with increasing discomfort. Several had been seated and were witnessing the exchange. "Is there a problem?" Isaiah asked, his voice calm but firm. "It's just unusual," Amber replied, not looking up from her tablet. "Economy boarding finished 15 minutes ago. You must have misunderstood the announcements." A white businessman in his 40s sitting in 1C's name badge identified him as Richard Kane from Global Tech Solutions spoke up. "Excuse me, but I think you're making these folks uncomfortable. They clearly have first-class boarding passes." Amber's cheeks flushed pink. "I'm just following protocol, sir." "What protocol requires checking the same boarding pass 3 times?" Richard countered. Ruby placed a gentle hand on Isaiah's arm and whispered, "Let's just continue observing." From the back of the cabin, another flight attendant had noticed the interaction. Jake Peterson, a 10-year veteran with Eclipse Airlines, recognized the Washingtons immediately. His eyes widened, but when Ruby caught his gaze, she subtly shook her head and put a finger to her lips. Jake nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding they wanted to remain anonymous. Amber finally had no choice but to allow them to proceed. "Seats 2A and 2B are on your right," she said stiffly, not offering the assistance with bags she'd provided to other first-class passengers. "Thank you, we know," Ruby replied, with dignity, having flown on their own airline hundreds of times. As they settled into their seats, Jake approached with pre-flight beverages. "Welcome aboard," he said professionally, giving no indication he recognized them. "May I offer you something to drink before takeoff?" "Water would be lovely, thank you," Ruby said. "I'll have the same," Isaiah added. As Jake served them, he quietly said, "It's an honor to have you flying with us today." His words were ambiguous enough that no one would guess he knew their identities, but sincere enough that the Washingtons appreciated the sentiment. From her position at the front of the cabin, Amber watched the interaction with narrowed eyes. For the remainder of the boarding process, she focused her attention on other passengers, deliberately avoiding eye contact with the Washingtons. Isaiah leaned close to his wife. "I'm starting to understand those customer complaint patterns we've been seeing." Ruby nodded thoughtfully. We'll need to address this at the corporate level. But first, let's see how the flight goes. As the cabin door closed and the safety demonstration began, the Washingtons settled in for what would prove to be one of the most revealing flights in Eclipse Airlines history. As the plane taxied to the runway, Ruby closed her eyes, the gentle vibration of the aircraft triggering memories from decades ago. Her mind drifted back to 1986, when Eclipse Airlines was nothing more than an ambitious dream shared between her and Isaiah. Isaiah Washington had been one of the few black pilots in the Air Force during the Vietnam era, earning numerous commendations for his skill and courage. After his military service, he applied to every major airline in the country, only to be repeatedly rejected despite his impeccable credentials and thousands of flight hours. "It's not the right fit," they would say. Or, "We've decided to go with a candidate with more commercial experience." But Isaiah knew the real reason. It was the same reason Ruby, despite her PhD in economics from Howard University and teaching position at Georgetown, couldn't get her research on aviation economics published in mainstream journals. One evening in their modest Washington, D.C. apartment, after Isaiah had received his 23rd rejection letter, Ruby found him sitting at their kitchen table with a legal pad covered in calculations. "What are you doing?" she asked, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "If they won't let me fly their planes, then maybe it's time we create our own airline," he replied, looking up with determination in his eyes. Ruby pulled up a chair. "Tell me more." That night, Eclipse Airlines was born, named for the phenomenon where something small can temporarily obscure something much larger. A metaphor for how they plan to challenge the aviation giants with their small, black-owned airline. For the next year, they developed business plans, secured licenses, and approached investors. 27 banks turned them down before First Community Bank of D.C. A small black-owned financial institution took a chance on them. "We're going to need a miracle to make this work," the bank manager had warned them as they signed the loan documents. No, Ruby had replied confidently. "Just hard work, good service, and faith that people will choose an airline that treats everyone with dignity." Their first fleet consisted of 2 small turboprop planes, offering limited service between Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and Charleston cities, with significant black populations and business connections. Isaiah piloted many of the early flights himself, while Ruby managed operations, finances, and marketing from a tiny office at Reagan National Airport. From the beginning, they established principles that would guide Eclipse Airlines: hire diverse staff, create opportunities for those traditionally excluded from aviation, and ensure every passenger received equal treatment regardless of race or status. Their slogan, "Dignity in Flight," wasn't just marketing, it was their mission. The turning point came in 1992 when Isaiah and Ruby filed a landmark civil rights case challenging the Federal Aviation Administration's route allocation system, which had effectively prevented black-owned airlines from expanding to major hubs. Their victory opened doors not just for Eclipse, but for minority-owned transportation businesses across America. Through the 1,990 seconds, Eclipse grew steadily, adding jets to their fleet and expanding to more cities. They faced constant resistance, major airlines cutting prices on competing routes, airports assigning them distant gates, industry publications ignoring their successes. But they persevered. "We're not just building an airline," Isaiah often told new employees during orientation. "We're proving that excellence doesn't have a color." By the early 2000s, Eclipse had become a regional powerhouse with a reputation for exceptional service. They pioneered programs like paid flight training for minorities, partnerships with historically black colleges and universities, and executive development tracks for women and people of color. Their success forced larger airlines to reconsider their own diversity practices. As Eclipse continued to grow, Isaiah and Ruby faced pressure to sell to larger carriers. The offers were tempting hundreds of millions that would secure their family's future for generations. "We didn't build this to get rich," Ruby reminded Isaiah when a particularly lucrative offer came in. "We built this to change things." So instead of selling, they took the company public in 2008, maintaining controlling interest while creating wealth for their employees through generous stock options. By 2020, Eclipse Airlines had grown to a fleet of over 120 aircraft, serving 60 destinations with a market value exceeding $4 billion. The plane hitting a patch of turbulence jolted Ruby back to the present. She opened her eyes and looked at Isaiah, who was reading through quarterly reports on his tablet. His hair had turned from black to silver over the decades, but his eyes still held the same determination she'd fallen in love with in college. Thinking about the old days, he asked, noticing her gaze. "Yes," she smiled. "Remember when we could barely afford fuel for those first 2 planes?" Isaiah chuckled. "And now look at us. Though I'm starting to wonder if we've lost something along the way." Ruby glanced toward Amber, who was chatting animatedly with a white passenger, while continuing to ignore them. "Perhaps we have. But that's why these mystery trips are so important." The captain announced they'd reached cruising altitude. As the seatbelt sign turned off, the Washingtons prepared to observe the next phase of service and the next test for Eclipse Airlines' commitment to equal treatment for all passengers. The seatbelt sign had been off for nearly 10 minutes, and the first-class cabin was buzzing with the low murmur of conversations and the subtle clicks of laptops opening. Service should have begun by now, particularly in first class, but Amber seemed to be deliberately taking her time. She emerged from the galley with a drink cart and started serving from the front row, row 1, where Richard Kane and 3 other white passengers sat. She chatted amicably with them, asking about their drink preferences, offering wine recommendations, and providing warm towels with a flourish. "Would you care for the Californian Chardonnay, or perhaps the French Bordeaux?" she asked Richard, presenting both bottles for his inspection. "The Bordeaux sounds excellent," he replied, accepting both the wine and the mixed nuts she offered. Isaiah and Ruby observed quietly from row 2. When Amber finished with row 1, instead of moving naturally to their row, she wheeled her cart past them to serve rows 3 and 4. Have you ever experienced or witnessed someone being deliberately ignored because of their race? Comment number 1 if you've seen racial profiling in action, like what's happening to the Washingtons right now. Hit that like button if you think Amber is about to get the surprise of her career, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice being served. Do you think Isaiah and Ruby should reveal their identities now, or let this uncomfortable situation continue? Let's see what happens next. After serving the entire first-class cabin, Amber finally returned to the Washingtons, her demeanor noticeably cooler than with other passengers. "Something to drink?" she asked flatly. "Water with lemon for both of us, please," Isaiah said politely. Amber poured the water carelessly, causing some to splash onto Ruby's sleeve. "Oh my," Ruby said, reaching for a napkin. "Sorry about that," Amber replied without sounding sorry at all. She didn't offer additional napkins or assistance before moving away swiftly. From the other aisle, Jake Peterson noticed the interaction. He quickly approached with extra napkins and a concerned expression. "Mrs. Washington, please let me help you with that," he said, handing her several cloth napkins. "And let me bring you both some fresh water properly served." "Thank you, young man," Isaiah said, noting the flight attendant's name badge. "Jake, is it? Your attentiveness is appreciated." "My pleasure, sir. Would you care for our premium snack selection as well? The artisanal cheese plate is excellent today." "That would be lovely," Ruby replied with a warm smile. Jake returned promptly, with fresh drinks properly served on linen coasters, the promised cheese plate, and warm towels. The full first-class service that Amber had provided to other passengers, but denied them. In the galley out of passengers' earshot, Amber confronted Jake. "Why are you giving them special treatment?" she hissed. "They're probably just using upgrade vouchers or something." Jake stared at her in disbelief. "Special treatment? I'm giving them the same service everyone in first class receives, the service you should have provided." "Whatever. They don't look like they belong up here." Jake took a deep breath, restraining his anger. Amber, do you know who they are? Should I? She replied dismissively. Maybe you should check the manifest more carefully next time, he suggested. And regardless of who they are, every passenger deserves respect. Amber rolled her eyes. Please. They probably got those seats with diversity miles or something. Jake's eyes widened at the blatantly racist comment. That's not even a thing, Amber. And if I ever hear you say something like that again, I'll report it directly to HR. Whatever she muttered, brushing past him to return to the cabin. Jake stood in the galley, torn between his duty to maintain professionalism and his desire to inform the Washingtons of Amber's behavior. As one of the few black male flight attendants at Eclipse, he'd experienced his share of prejudice, but had always found support from management, a stark contrast to his previous employer. He knew that wasn't an accident. It was because of the Washingtons' leadership and values. Meanwhile, Ruby dabbed at the water stain on her sleeve, exchanging a meaningful look with Isaiah. 50 years of building this airline, she whispered, and we're still fighting the same battles. Isaiah nodded sadly. The question is, how deep does this problem go? Is it just one flight attendant, or have we lost our way? The question hung between them as the flight continued toward Atlanta, where the answer awaited at Eclipse Airlines headquarters. While Flight 1876 made its way south, activity at Eclipse Airlines' gleaming headquarters in Atlanta was reaching a fever pitch. The 15-story glass building, shaped like an aircraft wing, housed over 2,000 employees who managed the airline's operations across the country. On the top floor, CEO Brandon Morris paced his corner office, occasionally glancing at his watch. At 43, Brandon was one of the youngest CEOs in the airline industry, handsome, Harvard-educated, and ambitious. His walls displayed numerous awards Eclipse had won under his leadership: most profitable regional airline, fastest-growing carrier, best shareholder value. Noticeably absent were the awards the airline had once been known for: best workplace diversity, outstanding customer service, and community impact. They land at 4:30 tomorrow, right? Brandon asked his executive assistant Melissa. Yes, sir. Mr. and Mrs. Washington's official visit is scheduled to begin with the 5:30 executive dinner. All board members have confirmed attendance. Brandon nodded, adjusting his Italian silk tie. Make sure their suite at the Four Seasons has the usual arrangement: Macallan 25, Ruby's favorite flowers, and the artisan chocolates. Already arranged, Sir. Melissa confirmed. Perfect. Brandon smiled confidently. This quarterly visit should be smooth sailing. Our numbers are excellent. We've cut costs by 12%, and the new routes to the West Coast are performing above projections. What Brandon didn't know, what would have made him panic rather than preen, was that Isaiah and Ruby Washington were already in the air, heading to Atlanta, incognito on Flight 1876, witnessing firsthand how far Eclipse Airlines had strayed from its founding principles. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Tanya Phillips, the airline's director of human resources, entered with a thick folder under her arm and a concerned expression on her face. Brandon, we need to talk about these customer complaints, she said, placing the folder on his desk. They're increasing at an alarming rate, particularly regarding discriminatory treatment. Brandon waved a dismissive hand without opening the folder. Every airline gets complaints, Tanya. People will claim discrimination just to get free upgrades or vouchers. Tanya, a black woman in her 50s who had been with Eclipse since its early days, fixed Brandon with a steady gaze. These aren't isolated incidents. We're seeing a pattern, especially since the new hiring practices went into effect. You mean since we started hiring based on qualifications rather than filling quotas? Brandon replied with an edge to his voice. We never had quotas, Tanya corrected firmly. We had initiatives to ensure diverse candidates weren't being overlooked, which is entirely different. The Washingtons built this airline on the principle that everyone deserves dignity and opportunity. Brandon's expression hardened. The Washingtons built a regional carrier, I'm building a national powerhouse." Times changed Tanya. The tension in the room was palpable. Tanya had been one of the first employees Isaiah and Ruby had hired, starting in customer service and working her way up through the ranks. She remembered when Eclipse operated out of a tiny office, when every employee knew each other by name, when the Washingtons personally welcomed new hires. This company was founded because the Washingtons experienced discrimination firsthand, she reminded him. They created Eclipse so everyone would be treated with respect, regardless of race or background. Brandon sat down at his desk, tapping his Mont Blanc pen impatiently. "And I respect that history, but our responsibility now is to the shareholders. Sentiment doesn't pay dividends." Tanya thought back to Brandon's hiring 5 years ago. Isaiah had been hesitant, concerned about Brandon's Wall Street background and lack of experience with Eclipse's unique culture. Ruby had suggested giving him a chance, believing they could mentor him to understand their vision. But 3 months after Brandon took the helm, the Washingtons had stepped back from day-to-day operations, retaining their board positions, but allowing Brandon to lead the company. Under his leadership, Eclipse had indeed grown, but so had turnover among minority staff. The diverse supplier program had been scaled back in favor of larger contractors offering lower bids. Customer service training now emphasized efficiency over compassion. The company's once renowned internship program for students from historically black colleges and universities had been replaced with recruitment primarily from Ivy League schools. "Brandon, when the Washingtons visit tomorrow, they're going to ask about these issues," Tanya warned. "How do you plan to address their concerns?" "I'll show them our growth charts," he replied confidently. "Our stock is up 32% since last year. That should answer any questions." Tanya shook her head sadly. "You still don't understand what they care about, do you?" "I understand business," Brandon retorted, "and business is about numbers, not feelings. Now, if there's nothing else, I have a budget meeting to prepare for." Recognizing the dismissal, Tanya collected her folder and walked toward the door. She paused before leaving. "The diversity initiative isn't just for show, Brandon. It's the foundation this company was built on. Ignore that at your peril." After she left, Brandon swiveled his chair to gaze out at the Atlanta skyline. Under his leadership, Eclipse had nearly doubled in size. New routes, new aircraft, new partnerships, all contributing to a soaring stock price and generous executive bonuses. If some of the old-timers couldn't adapt to his modern management style, that was their problem, not his. What Brandon Morris failed to understand, what he would soon learn the hard way, was that Isaiah and Ruby Washington hadn't built Eclipse Airlines just to create another carrier. They had built it to change an industry, and they weren't about to watch their legacy be dismantled for quarterly profits. On Flight 1876, now halfway to Atlanta, the Washingtons continued their quiet observation, unaware of exactly how far the company culture had shifted, but increasingly concerned about what they were witnessing. The true state of Eclipse Airlines was about to become clear to its founders, with consequences no one, especially not Brandon Morris or Amber Wilson, could anticipate. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light turbulence ahead. I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign as a precaution. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin and take your seats." Passengers reached for their seatbelts as the plane began to bounce slightly. In first class, Jake quickly collected glasses and secured the service items while Amber made a perfunctory pass through the cabin. The nearest jump seat to the Washingtons' row was directly across from them. With all other flight attendants already seated, Amber had no choice but to take this position, placing her directly face-to-face with the couple she'd been avoiding. As the turbulence increased, Ruby placed a hand on her chest, wincing slightly. "Are you all right, dear?" Isaiah asked, immediately concerned. "Just a little discomfort," she assured him. "Probably just the stress of the day." But as the plane hit another patch of rough air, Ruby's discomfort visibly increased. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. Jake, although strapped into his jump seat at the front of the cabin, noticed her distress. "Mrs. Washington, are you okay?" he called over. Amber's head snapped up at the use of their name, and the concern in Jake's voice. "My wife has a mild heart condition," Isaiah explained. "It acts up sometimes under stress. Do we have any medical personnel on board?" Jake immediately unstrapped himself. "I'll check the manifest," he said, moving toward the crew area despite the turbulence. Amber remained frozen in her seat, her eyes now fixed on Ruby's pearl necklace, the one with the small platinum eclipse charm that only top executives received. Recognition began to dawn on her face. You're Ruby Washington," she asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Ruby opened her eyes, meeting Amber's gaze directly. "Yes, I am. And this is my husband, Isaiah." The color drained from Amber's face as full realization hit her. Washington, as in the founders of Eclipse Airlines, Isaiah confirmed, calmly. "The airline you work for." Amber's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and horror. Around them, first-class passengers who overheard the exchange began to whisper and stare. Richard Kane, the businessman from row 1 who had defended them earlier, turned around in his seat. "Wait, you're the Washingtons. The ones who built Eclipse from scratch back in the 80 seconds I read about you in Forbes." The whispers grew louder as Jake returned with the manifest. "We have 2 doctors on board," he reported. "One in economy, one in business class. Should I call for assistance?" "Not necessary at the moment, thank you," Ruby replied, her discomfort seemingly eased. "The spell has passed, but I appreciate your attentiveness, Jake." Jake nodded professionally, though his eyes conveyed deeper respect. "Of course, Mrs. Washington. Please don't hesitate to let me know if you need anything at all." Amber remained paralyzed in her jump seat, her face ashen. The turbulence began to subside, but the captain kept the seatbelt sign illuminated as they navigated through the weather system. I didn't know," Amber finally stammered, her voice trembling. "I had no idea who you were." "Would it have made a difference?" Isaiah asked quietly. "Should it have made a difference?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Amber had no answer. As the seatbelt sign finally turned off, Amber unbuckled with shaking hands and practically fled to the galley. Jake followed her while the buzz of conversation in first class grew louder as passengers shared the news of who was traveling among them. In the galley, Amber was hyperventilating. "I'm going to be fired," she whispered frantically. "My career is over. Oh my God, I treated the founders like they were. Like they didn't belong in first class." Jake handed her a cup of water. "Breathe," he instructed. "Just breathe." "You knew," she accused. "You recognized them and didn't tell me." "It wasn't my place," Jake replied, "and frankly, it shouldn't have mattered who they were. Every passenger deserves respect." In first class, Richard Kane had moved to the empty seat beside Isaiah and was enthusiastically introducing himself. "Your airline changed the industry," he gushed. "The way you challenged the major carriers' route monopolies in the 90 seconds was brilliant. I use your case study when training my business development team." Other passengers were now openly staring and whispering. Some took discreet photos with their phones. Ruby leaned toward Isaiah. "So much for traveling incognito," she murmured. "The cat's out of the bag now," he agreed. "But maybe that's for the best. We've certainly learned a lot about the current state of our airline." Ruby nodded thoughtfully. "The question is, what do we do about it?" First, Isaiah said, "We see how the rest of this flight plays out. Then we have a very interesting board meeting to prepare for." As the aircraft began its descent toward Atlanta, news of the Washington's presence had spread throughout the plane. Flight attendants from economy and business class found excuses to pass through first class for a glimpse of the legendary founders. In the cockpit, the captain received a message from Atlanta operations VIPs on board identified. Executive greeting planned for arrival. What had begun as a routine mystery shopper exercise had transformed into something much more significant. A moment of reckoning for Eclipse Airlines, its leadership, and its future. And as the Georgia landscape appeared below them, no one on Flight 1876 could predict exactly how this reckoning would unfold. Word traveled through first class with remarkable speed. Within minutes of the Washington's identity being revealed, passengers were discreetly searching their names on phones and tablets, reading articles about the pioneering black couple who had changed the aviation industry forever. Richard Kane, still sitting beside Isaiah, was practically vibrating with excitement. A respected business leader himself, he clearly viewed this chance encounter as a networking opportunity of a lifetime. Mr. Washington, your 1,992 case against the FAA is required reading in my company's leadership program, he enthused. Breaking the major carrier's stranglehold on prime routes was revolutionary. Isaiah smiled politely. It wasn't about breaking anyone's hold, Mr. Kane. It was about ensuring equal access for all qualified carriers, regardless of who owned them. Exactly, Richard agreed eagerly. Level playing field. Equal opportunity core American values applied to an industry that had ignored them. Genius. As Richard continued his enthusiastic praise, other passengers found excuses to walk past their row, stealing glances at the famous couple. Several stopped to introduce themselves, share compliments about Eclipse Airlines, or simply shake hands with the pioneers. In the galley, Amber was frantically reapplying her makeup, having spent the last 10 minutes in near panic. Jake watched her with a mixture of sympathy and disapproval. "What should I do?" she whispered desperately. "How do I fix this?" "Start by doing your job professionally," Jake advised. "Treat them and everyone else with genuine respect." That's what Eclipse was founded on. Amber nodded vigorously, checking her appearance one last time before squaring her shoulders and returning to the cabin. Her transformation was remarkable. Gone was the dismissive attitude, replaced by almost excessive attentiveness. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Can I get you anything at all? Perhaps some champagne to celebrate your return to Atlanta? Our premium blankets, a hot towel service." Ruby regarded her with calm dignity. "No, thank you. We're quite comfortable." Amber hovered uncertainly. "Please let me know if you need anything at all. It's such an honor to have you on board." Isaiah's expression remained neutral. "We appreciate your service, Miss Wilson." Chastened by his formal tone, Amber retreated, leaving the Washingtons to exchange knowing looks. "Too little, too late," Ruby murmured. "Indeed," Isaiah agreed. "But the real question is whether this attitude is isolated or symptomatic of larger issues at Eclipse." The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." As the announcement concluded, Jake approached the Washingtons. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington," he said quietly. "I've received word that there's a reception committee waiting at the gate. It seems your presence has been reported to headquarters." Ruby sighed. "So much for our incognito arrival. Thank you for letting us know, Jake." "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "If I may say so, it's been an honor serving you today. Eclipse Airlines changed my life. Before you created this company, people who looked like me weren't welcome in premium cabin service at major airlines." Isaiah reached out to shake Jake's hand. "Thank you for upholding our founding principles. It hasn't gone unnoticed." The aircraft began its final approach, banking gently over the sprawling Atlanta metropolis. Below them, the massive Hartsfield-Jackson Airport came into view, the busiest airport in the world, and home base for Eclipse Airlines operations. What the Washingtons couldn't see from the air was the frantic activity their unexpected arrival had triggered. In the terminal, CEO Brandon Morris had received an urgent call from his assistant while in the middle of a budget meeting. "They're," what he had exclaimed, standing up so abruptly his chair rolled backward into the wall. "On Flight 1876, right now. But they're supposed to arrive tomorrow." Now, as Flight 1876 touched down smoothly on runway 27R, Brandon stood at Gate A22 with a hastily assembled welcoming committee. Senior executives pulled from meetings, administrative assistants carrying flowers purchased from the terminal florist, and a visibly nervous airport manager. Remember, Brandon instructed the group act like we knew they were coming. No one mentions being surprised. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, the tension in the terminal mounted. Brandon straightened his tie, repeatedly reviewing potential explanations in his mind for why he hadn't been at the gate personally if the Washingtons asked. Inside the plane, the seatbelt sign turned off with a cheerful ding. As was customary in first class, passengers were invited to deplane first. Amber, now performing her duties with exaggerated courtesy, stood at the front of the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta, home of Eclipse Airlines. We invite our first-class passengers to deplane at this time. Thank you for choosing Eclipse, where everyone flies with dignity." The irony of her reciting the company's slogan after her earlier behavior wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed the in-flight interactions. Several passengers exchanged knowing looks. As the Washingtons gathered their belongings, Richard Kane approached one final time. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington, it's been a true honor meeting you. If you ever have time, I'd love to buy you lunch and hear more about your journey." "That's very kind," Ruby replied, accepting his business card. "Perhaps we can arrange something during our stay in Atlanta." The Washingtons moved toward the exit, where Amber stood with a forced smile. "Thank you for flying with us today," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. "I hope you enjoyed your flight." Isaiah paused, looking directly at her. "Miss Wilson, I think we both know that's not the case. But perhaps this experience will prove educational for all involved." Amber's smile faltered. I'm truly sorry, sir." "Sometimes sorry isn't enough," Ruby said gently. "Sometimes change is required." They stepped into the jetway where Jake was waiting to escort them to the terminal. As they emerged into Gate A22, they were met by a storm of flashing smartphones as passengers and airport staff recognized the famous founders. Brandon Morris rushed forward, arms outstretched. "Isaiah Ruby, what a wonderful surprise. Had we known you were arriving today instead of tomorrow, we would have arranged a proper welcome." Isaiah shook Brandon's hand firmly. "Impromptu inspections often provide the most accurate picture of an operation. Don't you think, Brandon?" The CEO's smile flickered momentarily. Of course. Always good to keep us on our toes." He laughed nervously. "Your car is waiting to take you to the Four Seasons, and we can reschedule tomorrow's meetings for this afternoon if you'd prefer." Actually, Ruby interjected smoothly. "We'd like to go directly to headquarters. And please call an emergency board meeting for 4 p.m. Brandon blinked rapidly. "Emergency board. But what's the emergency?" "That," Isaiah said firmly, "is precisely what we need to discuss." As they moved through the terminal toward the exit, Amber's supervisor approached her at the gate, his expression grave. "Amber, what happened on that flight? I just got a call from executive offices requesting all security footage from the cabin and a complete report on your interactions with the Washingtons." Amber's face crumpled. "I didn't know who they were," she whispered. Her supervisor shook his head sadly. "That's the problem, Amber. At Eclipse Airlines, it shouldn't matter who they are. Everyone flies with dignity. That's not just a slogan. At least it wasn't supposed to be." As the Washingtons' car pulled away from the terminal, the power had already begun to shift at Eclipse Airlines. By sundown, the company they had built from nothing would face a moment of truth that would determine its future and the futures of everyone connected to it from the CEO to the newest flight attendant. The boardroom on the 15th floor of Eclipse Airlines headquarters fell silent as Isaiah Washington concluded his presentation. Behind him, the final slide displayed a simple question: have we lost our way? Around the massive walnut table, 14 board members and executives sat in stunned silence. For the past hour, Isaiah and Ruby had methodically presented evidence they'd gathered not just from today's flight, but from 6 months of mystery shopping across the Eclipse network. As you can see, Ruby said, rising to stand beside her husband, this isn't about one flight attendant or one isolated incident. Our data reveals a systemic pattern of discrimination affecting multiple aspects of the customer experience. She clicked to the next slide, displaying a chart tracking customer complaints by demographic group. Complaints from passengers of color have increased 87% in the past 2 years, while overall complaints rose only 12%. Something is happening at Eclipse, and it directly contradicts our founding principles. Brandon Morris sat rigidly in his chair, his earlier confidence shattered. He had assumed this meeting would focus solely on the incident with Amber Wilson, a problem easily solved by firing one employee. Instead, the Washingtons had presented damning evidence of company-wide issues that pointed directly to his leadership. With all due respect, he attempted these numbers could be interpreted in multiple ways. Perhaps minority passengers feel more comfortable filing complaints with a black-owned airline. Maybe Isaiah interrupted firmly. You should stop reaching for explanations and start acknowledging the problem. Tanya Phillips, the HR director who had warned Brandon earlier, spoke up. I've been flagging these issues for over a year. The shift in corporate culture is undeniable. We've moved away from our core values of dignity, respect, and opportunity for all. The boardroom doors opened, and an assistant led in a visibly nervous Amber Wilson. She had changed out of her uniform into business casual attire, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Thank you for joining us, Miss Wilson, Ruby said, gesturing to an empty chair. Please sit down. Amber perched on the edge of the seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Am I being fired? She asked directly, her voice small but steady. That's what we're here to discuss, Isaiah replied. But not just your actions, the environment that made those actions possible. Ruby turned to the board. We founded Eclipse Airlines because discrimination in aviation wasn't just a policy problem, it was a culture problem. We built this company on the principle that everyone deserves dignity, passengers and employees alike. Miss Wilson's behavior today was inappropriate and discriminatory, yes. But we need to ask what kind of company culture allows an employee to believe such behavior is acceptable. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. I assure you we have anti-discrimination policies. Every employee undergoes sensitivity training during onboarding. Policies aren't culture, Ruby countered. Culture is what happens when no one thinks the boss is watching. Isaiah nodded in agreement. Miss Wilson, could you please explain to the board what happened on today's flight in your own words? Amber took a deep breath. I made assumptions about Mr. and Mrs. Washington based on their race and age. I assumed they didn't belong in first class and treated them differently than white passengers. Her voice shook, but she continued. I was rude, dismissive, and discriminatory. There's no excuse for my behavior. Thank you for your honesty, Ruby said. Now, can you tell us about your training when you joined Eclipse? What were you taught about the company's history and values? Amber looked surprised by the question. We had a 2-day orientation covering safety procedures, service protocols, and company policies. There was a short video about Eclipse's growth and expansion plans. Was there any significant content about why Eclipse was founded? About our mission of dignity and equal treatment? Not really, Amber admitted. The focus was mainly on efficiency metrics and customer satisfaction scores. Isaiah exchanged a meaningful look with Ruby before turning to Brandon. When we hired you, Brandon, what was the primary mission we emphasized for Eclipse Airlines? Put on the spot, Brandon cleared his throat. Profitable growth while maintaining service excellence. Interesting, Isaiah remarked, because what we actually said was ensure that the dignity of every passenger and employee remains our North Star even as we grow. It seems that message has been lost. The tension in the room was palpable as Ruby clicked to a new slide showing Eclipse's original mission statement side by side with the current version. The differences were stark, where the original emphasized equality, dignity, and community. Impact, the current version focused on shareholder value, market growth, and operational efficiency. We're not here to point fingers, Ruby said, though her gaze rested meaningfully on Brandon. We're here to correct course. Eclipse Airlines was built to change an industry, not to become just another airline that happens to have black founders. Isaiah addressed the board directly. We have decisions to make today about the future of this company. First, regarding Miss Wilson's actions. Amber tensed, visibly tears welling in her eyes. Miss Wilson, Isaiah continued, turning to her. Do you believe you deserve to be fired for your actions today? She nodded slowly. Yes, sir, I do. What I did was inexcusable. Perhaps Isaiah agreed, but firing you would be the easy solution. The harder path, the one that might actually create change, would be to make you part of the solution. Murmurs rippled around the table as board members exchanged confused glances. What do you mean? Amber asked cautiously. Ruby stepped forward. We're proposing that instead of termination, you work directly with me to develop and implement a new employee training program focused on the true history and values of Eclipse Airlines. You made mistakes today that revealed deep problems in our company culture. Now you can help fix those problems if you're willing. Amber stared at Ruby in disbelief. You want me to work with you? After how I treated you? Sometimes, Ruby said gently, the people who have made the most significant mistakes have the most powerful insights to share. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this unexpected turn of events. Finally, Amber spoke, her voice thick with emotion. I would be honored to accept that responsibility, Mrs. Washington. Thank you for this chance. Isaiah nodded approvingly before turning his attention to Brandon. Now to our second decision. Brandon, your leadership has driven impressive financial results. No one can deny that. But in the process, you've steered Eclipse away from its founding mission. The question is whether you're willing and able to recalibrate. Brandon's expression hardened. With all due respect, Isaiah, the airline industry has changed since you founded Eclipse. Sentiment doesn't keep planes in the air. My methods have increased shareholder value by over 30% and decreased employee retention among minorities by 42%, Tanya added quietly, while customer complaints about discriminatory treatment have nearly doubled. This isn't about sentiment, Isaiah replied firmly. It's about the soul of this company. We didn't build Eclipse just to make money. We built it to make a difference. Brandon's jaw tightened. If you're asking me to prioritize social justice over profitability, I don't think I'm the right CEO for that approach. That's exactly the false dichotomy that concerns us, Ruby said. The fact that you see dignity and profitability as mutually exclusive suggests you never understood our vision. The tension hung heavy in the air as Brandon realized the implications of his statement. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced down, then paled visibly. What is it? Asked one of the board members. Social media, Brandon replied hoarsely. Someone on the flight posted about how the founders were treated. It's trending nationally. Number Eclipse fails and number dignity in flight are the top hashtags. As if on cue, all their phones began buzzing with notifications. News of the incident had leaked, and the story was spreading like wildfire across platforms. Early market indicators showed Eclipse Airlines stock had already dropped 3% in after-hours trading. Isaiah stood, his imposing presence commanding the room's attention. This board has a choice to make. Continue on the current path and become just another airline that happens to have black founders in its history, or recommit to the principles that made Eclipse special in the first place. He looked directly at Brandon. And you have a choice as well. Adapt to our renewed vision or step aside for leadership that will. The message was clear. As the sun set over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the boardroom, Eclipse Airlines stood at a crossroads. The decisions made in the next few hours would determine not just the fate of a flight attendant and a CEO, but the future of a company that had once dared to change an industry. 6 months after Flight 1876 from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta, Isaiah Washington stood at the podium in Eclipse Airlines Training Center auditorium, surveying the audience of 300 employees with quiet pride. The large space hummed with anticipation as flight attendants, pilots, ground, staff, and executives gathered for the unveiling of the company's revitalized training program. When Ruby and I founded Eclipse Airlines nearly 40 years ago, Isaiah began his rich voice carrying to every corner of the room. We had a simple but powerful vision: to create an airline where everyone, passengers and employees alike, would be treated with dignity regardless of race, background, or appearance. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the diverse faces before him. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that mission. Success and growth became ends in themselves, rather than the means to fulfill our purpose. Today, we reclaim that purpose. Ruby joined him at the podium, elegant as always, in a deep purple suit, her silver hair gleaming under the lights. The program we're launching today isn't just about customer service or diversity training, she explained. It's about who we are as a company, our history, our values, and our responsibility to each other and the communities we serve. As the Washingtons stepped aside, a new figure approached the microphone. Amber Wilson, no longer in flight attendant blue, but wearing the charcoal gray suit of Eclipse's corporate training team, took their place at the podium. 6 months ago, I made a terrible mistake. Amber began, her voice steady, despite the emotion visible on her face. I judged 2 passengers based on their race and age, never imagining they were the founders of the very airline I worked for. The audience was silent, many having heard rumors of the incident, but now hearing the truth directly from the source. I expected to be fired, Amber continued. Instead, Mrs. Washington offered me something far more challenging: the opportunity to help transform our company culture. Working directly with her, I've had to confront my own biases, understand the true history of discrimination in aviation, and help create a program that will ensure no Eclipse employee ever makes the mistakes I made. She gestured to the screen behind her, where the title of the new program appeared: Dignity in Flight, Our History, Our Future. This isn't a typical corporate training, Amber explained. It's a comprehensive experience that includes historical immersion, first-hand accounts from industry pioneers, practical scenarios, and ongoing mentorship. Every employee, from the newest hire to the most senior executive, will participate in this program annually. Because dignity isn't a one-time lesson, it's a continuous commitment. As Amber outlined the program details, the auditorium doors opened quietly. Jake Peterson slipped in, now wearing the uniform of a senior cabin crew trainer. After his principled stand on Flight 1876, Jake had been promoted to head the practical training components of the new initiative, bringing his decade of experience and unwavering commitment to Eclipse's values. The most notable absence from the day's event was former CEO Brandon Morris. After the emergency board meeting 6 months earlier, Brandon had tendered his resignation, unwilling to embrace the company's renewed focus on its founding principles. In his place stood Tanya Phillips, the former HR director who had tried for years to address the cultural drift within Eclipse. As interim CEO, she had worked closely with the Washingtons to realign every aspect of the company with its original mission. After the formal presentation, Isaiah, Ruby, and Amber moved through the crowd, engaging with employees and answering questions. The atmosphere was electric with possibility and renewed purpose. "I never thought I'd be thanking the person who discriminated against me for helping save our company," Ruby remarked quietly to Amber as they took a moment between conversations. "But your willingness to confront your mistakes and grow from them exemplifies exactly what Eclipse is about: transformation and dignity." Amber smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You could have destroyed my career with a single word. Instead, you changed my life and helped me become someone who can change others' lives too." The training center's walls were newly adorned with photographs documenting Eclipse's history, the Washingtons standing proudly beside their first turboprop plane in 1986. Ruby testifying before Congress during their landmark legal battle, celebrations as Eclipse hired its first 100 employees, community outreach programs in underserved neighborhoods. Among these historical images hung a new edition, the cover of Business Week magazine from just 1 month ago, featuring Isaiah and Ruby Washington, under the headline, "Dignity as a Business Model: How Eclipse Airlines Founders Reclaimed Their Legacy and Transformed an Industry Again." The article detailed how, in the aftermath of the Flight 1876 incident, Eclipse had faced a crisis that threatened its reputation and financial stability. Rather than minimizing the problem or scapegoating a single employee, the Washingtons had used it as a catalyst for comprehensive change. The company had recommitted to its founding values while proving that principles and profitability could coexist. Eclipse's stock had recovered and then surged as the airline's renewed focus on dignity and respect resonated with passengers seeking authentic corporate values. As the event concluded, Isaiah made his way to the back of the room, where a special guest waited quietly. Richard Kane, the businessman who had spoken up for the Washingtons during that fateful flight, had become a valuable ally. His technology company now partnered with Eclipse on initiatives to increase accessibility and opportunity in both aviation and tech. Richard Isaiah greeted him warmly. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't have missed it," Richard replied, shaking his hand. "What you've accomplished here in just 6 months is remarkable. You haven't just fixed a problem, you've created a model other companies are scrambling to follow." "The work is far from over," Isaiah acknowledged, "but we're on the right path again." As attendees began to disperse, a young flight attendant approached Amber with a question about the training schedule. Isaiah overheard Amber's response. "The most important thing to remember," she told the new hire, "is that dignity isn't about knowing who deserves respect. It's about understanding that everyone deserves respect, regardless of who you think they are." Isaiah smiled. Perhaps the most powerful lessons sometimes came from the most unexpected teachers. Later that evening, Isaiah and Ruby boarded an Eclipse flight bound for Washington, D.C. As they settled into their first-class seats, the lead flight attendant approached with a warm, genuine smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington," she said, "it's an honor to have you on board. My name is Brianna, and I'll be taking care of you today." She hesitated, then added, "I just completed the new training program last week. Thank you for everything you've built and for making sure it stays true to its purpose." As the plane lifted into the twilight sky, Ruby reached for Isaiah's hand. "Not bad for a couple of kids from Howard University who were told they'd never make it in aviation," she murmured. Isaiah squeezed her hand gently. "We did always say dignity would fly if given the chance." Below them, the lights of Atlanta gave way to the darkness of the countryside, the plane carrying them homeward, just as their vision continued to carry Eclipse Airlines forward, not just as a business success, but as a living testament to the staving Eclipse, power of dignity, second chances, and the courage to reclaim one's purpose. This powerful story teaches us that true leadership isn't about titles or profits, but about staying true to your founding principles, even when tested. Isaiah and Ruby Washington built Eclipse Airlines not just as a business venture but as a vehicle for social change, creating dignity in an industry where they had experienced discrimination. The story reveals how easily corporate cultures can drift from their original mission when leadership focuses solely on financial metrics without honoring foundational values. Brandon prioritized shareholder value over human dignity, allowing discriminatory practices to flourish under his watch. Perhaps most importantly, this story demonstrates the transformative power of accountability paired with compassion. Instead of simply firing Amber, the Washingtons challenged her to grow from her mistake and help reshape the company culture. This approach created more meaningful change than punishment alone could have achieved. True dignity means seeing the humanity in everyone, even those who fail to see it in you. By offering Amber redemption rather than retribution, Isaiah and Ruby exemplified the very principles upon which they built their airline. In business and in life, our values must be more than slogans. They must guide our actions, especially when no one's watching. What moment in this story impacted you the most? Was it Isaiah and Ruby's patience during discrimination, Brandon's inability to understand the company's true mission, or Amber's journey from prejudice to champion of change? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in treating everyone with dignity, regardless of appearance or background, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful racism stories that transform perspectives. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that dignity should be everyone's North Star. Thank you for watching, and remember, our character is revealed not by how we treat the powerful, but by how we treat those we believe have no power at all.